Good day. So we have colleagues calling from Philippines. So Alex, thank you for joining us. So it's my great pleasure and the privilege to, on behalf of the Fields Institute and on behalf of the National Task Force for Rapid Modern Response here in Canada, I'm very pleased to introduce and welcome today's speaker, Quentin Dr. Greater. Dr. Greater received his PhD degree from Mountain Plain, and he spent 2 years in Japan. He's, I think, Japan Science Promotion Scholarship, and he's now a associate professor from University of Bordeaux. Quenda is one of the organizers of very active research seminars in, organized from Bordeaux, and he is one of the important member of a French school taking a phenomenological approach to the SARS coronavirus pandemic. So I'm very glad he's coming here today to share with us his progress. Thank you, Quentin.
All right. Well, first of all, let me thank you, Jae-Hong, and the other organizers of this seminar for the invitation. It's really a pleasure and an honor to speak at the Field Institute today. Today I want to introduce some very recent work we did with some colleagues on phenomenological models and how we can apply them to the SARS-CoV-2 epidemic. So my opening statement would be the following. So ever since this novel epidemic started about last year, we have seen a real explosion of the available data on the pandemic, which was released about around the world. So here are some screenshots of famous websites, famous or less famous websites that did this the broadcast of the coronavirus data. So maybe the most famous is the one on the top right of my screen. It's the Johns Hopkins University web page. So Johns Hopkins, they started to report data from all over the world very soon, and we have this kind of very cinematographic representation of the epidemic. So on the bottom left, we have about the same kind of data, so worldwide data categorized by country, published by WHO. And I wanted to show you 2 examples of more local data we can find. So this one on the bottom right is the French official website that reports data. So cumulative reported case data, and on the top left is a Japanese website that we used in some of our study because it actually published very detailed data, including high level of information on age in particular. And so we have this enormous amount of data which consists in mostly in a time series of reported cases, and we want to know how we can exploit them, so how we can use a mathematical approach to say something interesting about the disease by just looking at this kind of data. All right, so the first thing I want to do is introduce a very important model, which is the SIUR model, and a first approach to identify the parameters of this model. So I'm assuming that you are all at some level familiar with this kind of compartmental model. So each box here represents a differential equation in a system. And so the basic assumption is that we assume that our population, the population of a country, for instance, can be categorized in a very finite number of states. So we have susceptible individuals. These are the ones that can catch the disease. They are free of any infection. They never saw the pathogen, and then they can get infected. We have here 3 different infected states. So these are people that carry the pathogen, and And finally, at the end of the line, we have the removed class. So these are people that cannot get the disease anymore because they are they are immunized for the whole time scale of the study, or they are just removed from the system. Then how to read these arrows? They are fluxes that indicate on the population level how the mass of individuals that go from one class to the next one, right? So for instance, we have this arrow from S to I indicates that how to compute this flux. So here it involves the product of S times I plus U, which indicates that a susceptible can get infected when they got in contact with some other infected individuals. And we have a parameter tau, which characterizes well, actually it gathers a lot of information, and I will talk about it a little more later. First, I want to talk about the different kind of infected individuals, because there are 3 of them in this model. There are asymptomatic infectious individuals, which are people basically after they get infected, they are in COVID-19. They are infectious after a very short time, which we neglect here, but they don't show symptoms at first. Then when they express symptoms, it's another characteristic of the COVID-19 is that symptoms are there is a very large broad spectrum of symptoms, which goes from very mild symptoms like small fever and cough, and it can also take you to an intensive care unit. So we assume that we can categorize symptomatic individuals in 2 categories. There are unreported individuals, which are people that never appear on the official statistics because maybe they don't go to the doctor because they don't believe that their condition is serious, sufficiently serious, or they are misdiagnosed or this kind of event, or they are actually reported, and in this case, of course, they appear in the official statistics. And so, of course, how to move from one box to the other is important. And so there are 4 parameters in this model. There is this tau that I began to talk about, which gathers a lot of different information. It includes information on the frequency of contacts and also on the probability that the disease will be transmitted when there is contact between infectious individual and susceptible individual. We have nu and eta, which characterizes the average duration of stay in one compartment. So nu is the average duration of the asymptomatic period, and eta is the average duration of, so 1/eta is the duration of symptomatic state. And finally, we assume that we know the proportion of cases that will be reported at last. So this F characterizes the proportion of cases that will be reported when they go from asymptomatic to symptomatic. Okay, so last thing I want to mention is that when someone is symptomatic and reported, we assume that it stops contributing to the propagation of the epidemic, which you saw when you take a look at this transmission term. You see that it involves only asymptomatic infectious and unreported. Okay, so this model was introduced for COVID-19 by a couple of colleagues, so Liu et al. Published it very early in 2020 in Biology. And I'm also citing this report of Q in Nature that reveals the importance of asymptomatic cases. Okay, so now we have the model, and okay, so this is something I already said. So R stands for unreported, R stands for reported, U for unreported, and F is the fraction of reported cases. Okay, so we have now our model. And now let's take a look at the data. So we want to make a link between the model and the data. And so one important thing to account for is how to get the statistics of cumulative reported cases from our model, and it's expressed in this expression. So this CR is cumulative reported case, and it's equal to nu times f times I. So this is, let me go back one slide. It's precisely what goes into the symptomatic reported compartment. So this is what we know about the system, and this is what appears on official statistics. So here, the example is taken from the first wave in mainland China. This is the cumulative number of reported cases, which start at January 19. So how can we make a link between this CR compartment and the rest of the other parameters of the model? So we will focus first on the very early data, when everything is growing like an exponential. And so we focus on a short period at the beginning of the propagation of the epidemic. So here I took 10 days, right? Let's zoom on this period. And now we assume that everything grows like an exponential because we are at the beginning of the epidemic. So and the quantity of susceptible doesn't vary very much. You see, it's from it's at most 10,000 when you compare to the population of China. It's nothing. So I should be the cumulative, the number of infectious should be growing like an exponential. And the CR, if you remember the expression, the derivative of CR is a constant time I. So it's basically an exponential minus a constant. Okay. And this kind of function with three parameters, chi1, chi2, and chi3, we have statistical methods that can help identify this kind of function from the data. So when we apply this kind of method, we get a perfect fit, so the best we can have, of this kind of exponential model to the data. Okay, so this is the orange curve in this plot. And now that we know the shape of CR of t, we can use this equation to identify other unknown parameters of the model. So here is our very basic computation. So we know precisely chi1, chi2, and chi3. So we know CR, and we can differentiate. And from the definition of CR, we get I of t, and in particular I0, which is the initial number of asymptomatic infectious. And by the same computations, we can get a link between U0, this fitted parameter, and some other parameters of the model. Okay, same for R0. And finally, and last but not least, by using the first component of the differential system, we can identify the transmission rate as a function of other parameters. And this is important because transmission rate is particularly hard to estimate by other methods, because, as I said, it contains a lot of information. So now we can make a link between the initial behavior of CR of t and the other parameters of the system. So first thing that should be said about this link is that some of the parameters of the model cannot be identified because when you change one of them, you could potentially obtain the exact same fit to the data. Okay, for instance, and this is the case for any of the parameters on the right here, on the right of one of these equations here. If you, for instance, if you vary, you do a small variation of the nu, then it can be compensated by a small variation on the f, for instance. And so you cannot get extract information on nu or f or eta for that matter by just looking at the reported data. So you have to identify them by other methods. And so in all of what I will talk about, we will assume that we have precise information on these quantities a priori. So we know at the beginning what are the values of these quantities. Okay, so when we try to plug this value into the system, so we see a very good fit at the beginning, but this is normal because it's how we got the parameters. But very soon we saw that it starts to diverge, and this is true for the exponential model and also for the autonomous system of differential equations. And this reveals something about the system, and it's that one of our assumptions was wrong. And the assumption that was wrong is that tau is a constant, the transmission rate is a constant. This is no longer the case when the number of cases becomes to grow, because people start to react to the presence of the epidemic and they try to avoid being infected. So in particular, they will modify their behavior. Maybe it's there will be also political measures to wear masks and use some hydroalcoholic gel to disinfect hands, and to improve social distancing measures. All these modification of behavior, they will change the transmission parameter, and so it's wrong to assume that it's a constant. So one possibility is to assume shape of the transmission parameter and to identify this transmission from the data. And so, based on the study by Chowell and collaborators, we can use this shape of a tau, for instance, for first in the first approach. And this was used by Liu, Magal, Saidi, and Webb for COVID-19 epidemic. And so this is the shape of the tau. So the modification of tau characterizes the response of the population to the presence of the epidemic, and it's decreasing like an exponential. So when you identify the correct parameters, you can plug it into the system, and now you obtain a perfect match to the data. So this one is taken from Liu and collaborators. So it's the full model which contains public intervention measures. Okay, so now in the second part of my talk, I want to talk about an extension that we did in collaboration with Claire Magal on the variability of the reported data that comes from the testing policy. So this study is published in Infectious Disease Modeling, and the initial remark that was the source of this work is that our ability to detect cases is dependent on our ability to test people, to produce a test, and it should depend on it could depend on the availability of tests. There have been reports of shortage in tests, especially at the beginning of the COVID epidemic in France and also in Japan. And sometimes you see the curve of cases that grows like a straight line because, well, maybe one of the explanations could be that just that there were not enough tests available, and so the quantity of cases was underestimated somehow. So we wanted to understand this variability in the number of tests from a modeling point of view, and so we proposed this new model. So when you think of the SIUR model that I just presented, there are two novelties. So we added the e-compartment, but this is not the main change in the model. So this is actually it complexifies a little bit the analysis, but it's rather transparent. So the most important modification is this one. So we added the compartment, which is this D, and which stands for detectable individuals. So when someone begins to express symptoms, instead of going directly into the reported compartment, we assume that there is a first stage of a detectable state in a way, in which it has to make a decision on whether to go to a test or not. Okay, so this modifies a little bit the fluxes between boxes, and so among the novelties, we have this N of t, which stands for the quantity of tests that are done in one day. So this is an information that we have. We have precise information on the number of tests that are done each day, and we input it at this point of it controls the flux between D and R, so between the potentially detectable individuals and the reported individuals. So we have two other new parameters. We have sigma, which is the probability of a true positive, because tests are not, they can fail sometimes. They can report a negative result when the patient is actually infected. And we have this G parameter, which stands for the conditional probability that you will be willing to take a test when you are in a D compartment. Okay, so when we look at this model, so the first difficulty is how to estimate the parameter of this model, because we have a lot of new information. So and this is the data we used. So this is data for New York State. So when I said that testing is important in reporting cases, it's particularly true for the United States, because what is broadly available is testing data, but you don't find a lot of probable cases data. It's much harder to find. We tried. So our entire study is based on this kind of reports. So this is for New York State, and there are three kinds of information available. There is a cumulative number of tests, there is the cumulative number of positive tests, and the cumulative number of negative tests. Of course, there are only really two information here. There is the number of cases, so positive tests, and number of tests, because the number of negative tests can be deduced from the two other one. And we restricted ourselves to these two data sets, and we didn't use really the information on negative tests, and just the total number of tests and positive tests. So one of the key observations that allow the parameter identification is that initially the number of tests grows like a straight line. So this is an important hypothesis that we did, and that makes everything work. That we know we have an expression of a phenomenological model, in a way, for the number of tests. So we assume N of t is A times t minus t1 plus N1. So the number of tests grows like a straight line, and it starts at a potentially non-zero quantity. We don't need that this is true at the very beginning, but we just need a sufficiently large amount of time during which this is true. And in this case, we know this N of t, which is constant, equal to A. And so we can identify the parameters from early data in a very similar way to the one we did in the previous studies. Then by using the whole data set, we can identify transmission rate, which characterizes the response of the population to the presence of the epidemic. Okay, the tau of t is more complicated, but it's still possible. Okay, so when we look at the results, so this is the daily number of cases and the daily number of tests. So the black dots are the daily number of tests, and the red dots are the daily number of positive tests, so the cases. Then when we can match the behavior of this daily number of cases very precisely, and you can reproduce a lot of variations that are observed on the number of positive tests by just looking at the total number of tests. Okay, so what is inputted in our model is only the total daily number of tests, and we can still reproduce a lot of these observed variation in the positive cases. So we get more than just a trend. We get something that that contains that reproduces a lot of variations.
Can I ask a question?
There is a question.
Yes.
Sure.
So can you fit this to daily positive ratio?
Daily positive ratio. You mean the fraction of positive tests?
Yeah.
Actually, we didn't use this. We didn't use this information on daily positive ratio. I'm not sure about the question actually, but I want to say that, that there is a lot of bias in the selection of people that will be tested. We chose not to use the information of ratio of negative against positive tests. I'm not sure if it's related to the question, but
okay, thank you very much.
Sorry. Yeah. So we get this kind of a testing. Sorry, this kind of a very good match between the data and the model. So let's take a look at simulation results because it's interesting. So of course we used reasonable parameters for the assumed parameters, and we obtain this kind of curves for the cumulative number of infected individuals. So yellow is a undetectable infectious, so the one that have so mild symptoms that they will never even go to the medical doctors. They are the ones that could be potentially tested, but they finally do not get tested. So this is the CD. And so what appears on the statistics is a CR. And you see that with our choice of parameters, the CR corresponds to a very low fraction of the total number of cases. And in order to go a little further in our analysis, we tried some simulation by varying the testing policy and see what happens when, for instance, when we double the number of tests. And so we get this kind of curves. So this is for the detected cases, so the actual statistics. So the blue is the original one. Red is when you double the number of tests, and then we have 5 times, 10 times, and finally 100 times the number of tests, just to see how it impacts the number of cases. So when you look at reported at detected cases, so the official statistics, it doesn't happen to do much. So you can improve a little bit the number of detected cases by doubling the number of tests, but then it seems to the gain doesn't seem to be very high. I want to show also the undetectable cases, so people that express very mild symptoms, because there is interesting dynamics on when you look at the curves. You see that the curves they cross each other, and so this means that the increase of number of tests is not monotone with respect to the number of undetectable cases. And in particular, the dynamics, the underlying dynamics can be complicated, and so there is something going on that we don't fully understand. And so finally, and this is the last thing I will say about this model. So when you look at the total number of cases, then so this is actually all that goes into the remove the compartment of the differential system. Then there is an impact there is a real impact on the total number of cases, even though it was not so obvious when looking at the reported cases and also undetectable cases. And my understanding is that by increasing the number of tests, we prevented actually a lot of secondary cases, even if the testing is not perfect. And so you see that by just doubling the number of tests in this simulation, we can gain about 100,000 cases, which is not nothing in final. And there seems to be an optimum between the cost of the increasing the testing policy and the effect you can hope to gain on the number of cases, because you can see that you have a dramatic decrease between the original data and 10 times the number of tests. But after that, the gain doesn't seem to be very high. When you increase from 10 to 100, it's the effect is much more weak on the curves. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say on this particular study. And so the last part of my talk will be devoted to the reconstruction of the transmission rate from the data. So this is a collaboration with Jacques Demongeot and Pierre Magal. It's in Royal Society Open Science. So first of all, this is a picture of my collaborators, so Jacques Demongeot and Pierre Magal. And in this study, we focused on a slightly simplified model, SIUR model, in which we take into account only reported and unreported cases. But we ask a difficult question, which is, can we precisely identify the transmission rate tau of t just by looking at the reported case data? So we assume that we are given the non-identifiable parameters, so S0, nu, and F. And our goal is to identify the remaining parameters, which are tau of t and the initial number of infectious I0. So I give you the theorem first. So what should be remembered of this slide is that we can basically pick a function n of t. We assume mostly that it's so it's regular and it's increasing. And under these very weak assumptions, if this formula is positive, then we can construct tau of t, which will reproduce exactly this predefined number of cumulative reported cases. Basically, what I just said is that under very weak assumption on any kind of function, we can reproduce an epidemic model that will produce exactly this number of reported cases. Okay, and under this assumption, we can also identify I0 with the same criteria. So we can completely identify this parameter if we have a perfect information on the cumulative reported case data. So this is now the time to introduce what is a phenomenological model that was mentioned on my title. Phenomenological model, so it's a way to describe the data that will allow us to reconstruct the transmission rate without much more assumptions. So among the many possible choices, we focused on the Bernoulli-Verhulst equation. So this is a class of curves that are sufficiently flexible so that they can be matched to the COVID data, so epidemic data. And they have an explicit expression, so they are relatively easy to compute. So we have an efficient way to describe the data so let me show you how it works. So this is an example with the reported case data for China, and the black dots are the actual data, and the red curve is the Bernoulli-Verhulst curve. So we can reproduce almost exactly the dynamics of the data by looking at the curves. So we will focus in what I will say later on this kind of curve that can reproduce this kind of dynamics. So when we do the computation, we can compute an explicit formula for the transmission rate by just looking at the Bernoulli-Verhulst phenomenological model. So this means that we can actually pick the data, and we know all the parameters precisely. We know this chi, f, so chi, theta, n infinity, and n0 are identified from the data, and the f and the nu have to be assumed in advance. And then we can reconstruct this tau of t, which will reproduce the cumulative data. So it will fit the observed data perfectly. So when we look at what happens with reasonable parameters, we get this kind of shape. So this is a very robust shape. This is the instantaneous transmission rate in the population by our method. Here we picked nu equal to 0.2. And as I said earlier, so nu is not an identifiable parameter. So we could do small perturbation and still get a perfect match to the data. And so we tried, and for instance, so we tried another value of nu, which is also reasonable. So here it's 0.1. This means that the infection would last 10 days. And in this case, we observe when we compute the transmission rate that it crosses the zero line, so it becomes negative at some point, which is actually an information that is allowed by our method on this new parameter. It's an actual information on the length of the average length of the infection that we gain by our analysis, because so if we reduce it too much, this nu, then we stop being compatible with the data. Okay, so by doing the numerical method, so we can gain this upper bound on the average length of infection, which is of 3.3 days by using the first wave of mainland China. And similarly, we can get the condition on F, on the ascertainment rate, but it's not very significative. It's not very it doesn't mean much, because you see it's the magnitude is 10 to the minus 5. So the spectrum of F is relatively broad. So and this is actually we also tried several different countries, and we never find a very precise information on F, but we have some nice estimates of nu. Okay, so this is the final part of my talk, which is how to connect the waves. It's very related to the identification of the transmission rate, of course. So let's take a look at the French data, and what I presented in the last section, the last part of my talk, is how we fit a Bernoulli-Verhulst curve to the data. So Bernoulli-Verhulst is fine when you look at an epidemic wave, but it does not allow more flexibility than that. So it's limited to one epidemic wave, because well, when you look at the differential equation, it's like a logistic curve basically. So it's growing and saturating at some point, but then it cannot grow again. So we can produce a very nice fit to the data, but only when we look at the precise dynamics at precise parts of the curve, which are the following. So this is the data for France. We had the first wave, which is from the end of February, let's say, to the end of May. Then a second wave that so these time spans are identified by looking at the data. So here we identify from August to December, and then this last part is kind of controversial, but we can actually get a very nice fit by an exponential by the start of Bernoulli-Verhulst curve. So we used it, and so we obtain this kind of graph where we know perfectly how to fit the data perfectly in these blue curves, and we can get a lot of information in these blue areas. But so the new question is how to connect these these time frames. So our idea, and this is backed by some very serious work, is to connect it by a straight line, because so in blue the dynamics, it looks like Bernoulli rules, so that there is a real population dynamics in a way. So there is a real growth of the infected population, and this is what we call an epidemic growth, because new cases, so infected people, they are likely to infect other people, right? But in yellow, the yellow parts, it's not really true. This is when, for instance, when we release the first waves, then we have a very low number of cases, let's say, that are dispatched over the country. And when you look at the data, it appears as if you have random cases that appear to be fluctuating around a mean. So it makes a lot of sense to assume that it's a straight line between epidemic phases. Okay, and so during an epidemic phase, this is what I just talked about. We know perfectly we have a very good phenomenological model, and we know how to reconstruct the transmission rate to reproduce the data by epidemic model. Actually, we can do it again. We can do it also in endemic phase, so what we call endemic phase, when the dynamics of new cases look like random, by assuming that our phenomenological model is a straight line. And we can do the same computation and get an explicit expression for the transmission rate. Okay. And so the difficulty now is that we want to connect these phases, but we want to keep the information on the transmission rate. We want, because if we don't just connect abruptly the different phases by just imposing continuity, we may lose the derivative. So we can make a sharp connection, and you can lose the derivative. And so this tau, which involves the derivatives of CR up to the second derivative, this tau will stop meaning something. And we want to avoid that at all costs. So what we did is a smooth interpolation between the phases in order to preserve this derivative, and so to be able to reproduce the data by a real epidemic model. This is what we get. So we still get a very nice fit. This is the data of the cumulative reported case data. And so when we look at the derivative of this model, so the daily number of cases in a way, then we still get a very nice description of the trend of the epidemic in the country. Okay, and we were surprised to observe that so from this method we actually see the number of the tendency of the daily number of cases to be decreasing in the future. So this is a very good sign. We were very excited about this. And so one of the novelties about our analysis is the ability to compute another notion of a basic reproductive number. So basic reproductive number has been used widely as an indicator of the future trend of the epidemic. Basically, if it's bigger than 1, the epidemic is growing. And if it's lower than 1, the epidemic is shrinking, so it's going better. So traditional methods focus on what they call effective reproduction number, and it's estimated as a weighted average, so the quotient of two averages of the past of the data. So typically, to compute it, you assume that you know the incidence data J of t, which is so usually it looks like DR, so the daily number of reported cases. And so the expectation of J should be a weighted average of the past data, so the new cases that are created by past infections, where you assume you know this the weights, of course. And since we know how to compute tau of t and s of t by integrating the differential system, then we can propose another notion of reproduction number, which comes from the differential equation system. So this is the following. This is the basic reproduction number that we get by using the state of the population at time t as an initial condition to the compartment system. Okay, so the traditional methods gives a curves like this, so very, very noisy. So I put the blue and yellow background to help the reading, but it has nothing to do, of course, with the computation of this curve. And by our method, we get this kind of curve. So we have a very smooth curve and some variation that occur because of the regularization of the transition between phases. But basically, we can pinpoint a very robust trend in the daily reproductive number, the basic reproduction number. So okay, so when you look at both curves together, we seem to rather agree with each other. So of course, quantitatively, it may be the two notions may be different. So the definition is not exactly the same, but we are very excited about this new method to compute an indicator on the disease. Okay, so I did not resist showing you some projections. So these are, of course, to take with extreme caution, because we didn't do any sensitivity analysis yet. And this is just the continuation of the phenomenological model for the cumulative number of cases. And so for France, here we predict that, I use the data, I think it's the data from last week, and we predict up to 5 million cases, something like that, at the 5th of June. Okay, and when you look at the daily number of cases, then so one of the interesting information that we can get out of this graph is when we will go below a certain threshold of daily number of cases. So here I chose this is completely arbitrary, but I chose 10,000 cases per day, and this should happen at the end of April, if you believe this analysis. And so finally, when we look at the reproduction number, it should be actually already below 1, according to our fit of the data, our method. And it will be persistent. It should be persistent in the future. Of course, all of this is to take with extreme caution, because any modification of the individual behavior of the people could completely wrong this kind of estimates. Okay, so I hope that I've raised your interest, and I thank you for listening to my talk.
Thank you very much. So maybe we can start with questions. If Rolex, you still want to ask the questions, you're really from this is early in the morning now in Philippines.
Hello, good morning again.
Good morning.
So I would just like to ask, why did you choose the phenomenological model instead of other models in studying this COVID-19?
Yeah. You mean well? So why we chose to use the phenomenological model is because we need something to describe the data, because our analysis relies on this kind of computation. And so the choice of this particular model of Bernoulli-Verhulst is basically because it works very well, actually, because we didn't find any other model that could fit the data as perfectly as this one. And so what I can say is one of the interesting features of this model is that it has a different behavior at the beginning and near the end. So the initial phase is exponential when you look at this. So you see that when n go to 0, this is initially an exponential phase, but you arrive at the saturation by you can arrive at a completely different dynamics, and so it makes it particularly well fitted to detect variations in the people's behavior. So the way it the acceleration of cases in a way is decreasing over time.
Okay, thank you, sir. Can I ask another question?
Sure.
Yes,
sure.
please.
If it was right. since vaccines now are emerging from different
Yeah.
countries, are you planning to have studies about the causality inferences of these
Well, yes,
treatments?
of course, vaccine. So for now, what I presented here is completely we didn't consider any kind of vaccination, but of course, it's an interesting, it's very interesting way to continue our research.
Okay. Thank you.
We'd like to do it in the future.
So I have another question though. So
Yeah.
about the phenomenological model, you code the Bernoulli-Weierhahn model, and other literature
Yes.
code Richard model. So can you
Oh.
give me a little bit explanation?
Oh, so you want me to justify the name?
You don't have to justify. I mean, there must be a reason you can code a different way. I'm curious about the history.
Yeah. Actually, well, this is because this equation is sometimes called the Bernoulli-Verhulst equation. So Verhulst is Pierre-François Verhulst, who is a mathematician, if I'm not mistaken, from the 19th century. Yes, and who coined well, this kind of logistic equation with saturation, and so he's the one at the origin of the dynamics, and the Bernoulli. So Pierre was actually the one who did the naming, but Bernoulli was one of the first scientists to ever publish a study on epidemiology, on mathematical epidemiology. And you can actually track the paper down by using the French Système Gallica. Of course, it's in French, so it may be a little hard to read. But there is a paper, I think it's 1760, of Bernoulli, who studied the influence of inoculation of a kind of smallpox, I think. So it's a kind of the first study about vaccination also. And there was a nice study of by Dietz and Easterbeek. I don't remember the date exactly, but it's recent paper, and they went back on this Bernoulli, Daniel Bernoulli study from the 18th century. Yeah.
Now, other questions? Maybe I can. If I see somebody raise a hand, I will let them to ask a question first. But otherwise, I have one more question about. So before this week, or maybe a couple of weeks ago, so literally there are two epidemics in much of Europe, right? So you have the wild strain, the resident strain, and then you have new strain,
Yes.
both with different reproduction number. So how did the reproduction number observed reflect on the reproduction number of these two epidemics, basically?
Yes, so you're talking about the new variants of COVID, probably the British variant.
Yeah.
And okay, so in our study we didn't consider the variants, and it's a little bit unclear how it affects the basic reproductive number. Actually, that would be really interesting to investigate in the future, and probably it's much more difficult to include information on variant in our model. But what I can say is that what we do, to summarize, is that we reproduce the data by using a real epidemic model. This should be really robust to this kind of perturbation, unless you expect that the parameters of the new variants are very different from the original ones. And I must confess that I don't see an experimental way to measure with precision the parameters of these new variants. So this is this is about what I can say.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? If not, then on behalf again the Fields Institute and the National Task Force, I would like to thank you, Quentin, for coming, and we're looking forward to really interact with the French group. You're playing a very important role, and